The Metal Gear Solid 2 and Metal Gear Solid 3 parts of this Master Collection are where we see the biggest issues. In essence, both of these are the same as the HD Collection versions released in 2011 on Xbox 360 and PS3, and there's no real attempt to disguise the fact either. In booting either of these games, you'll even catch a flash of the old HD Collection logo in the bottom right. So with that in mind, the content of each game is much the same as it was on PS3 and 360. The key exception being that the MSX2, Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake games are siphoned off, removed from the MGS3 menus and put in their own separate app. Also, interestingly, there are certain benefits to playing Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3 from the Master Collection today. For one, the delay on codec dialogue in MGS2 has been reduced. Previously, in the HD Collection, the codec screen would pop up and hang in place for 3 seconds until the dialogue kicked in. But that wait is now thankfully reduced on PS5, Series X, Switch, and PC. Potentially then, Konami has gone in to tweak these games with the new opportunity to do so, and iron out a few other issues for the Master Collection. Jumping to the comparisons next, this is where the problems show up. Between Switch, Xbox Series X, and PS5, we know the score with its resolution, a native 720p for both MGS2 and 3, but that doesn't tell the whole story. The fact is, anti-aliasing quality differs between all three consoles, notably in Metal Gear Solid 2, where PS5 offers the most thorough treatment of rough edges. Now let's be honest, at 720p it's never going to be too flattering, but PS5 is at least the best of the bunch. So check out these panning shots of the oil rig with its hard geometric edges. Especially in zooming in, Nintendo Switch leaves all of these edges entirely raw at 1280x720. They go untreated without any anti-aliasing whatsoever. It creates this heavy visual noise, flickering, especially in motion. And as for Series X in the middle, there's something unusual going on here, in that it finds a midway point between PS5 and Switch in terms of the quality of edge treatment. For example, see how in this panning shot, parts at the bottom of the image are clearly treated on Series X with a form of anti-aliasing. It reduces the moire patterns and the noise. But then, the metallic lines at the top of the image are left raw just like Switch, with a similar flicker. All of this applies to MGS2, but the upside is, for Metal Gear Solid 3, all three consoles here do apply anti-aliasing across the board, so it's really MGS2 on Switch and Series X that stick out. Anti-aliasing goes in PS5's favour, but there's another twist in texture filtering. Check out this corridor in MGS2 with all those fine metallic details across the floor, and it shows anisotropic filtering quality on PS5 is a big step up over Series X, which uses a lower quality filtering solution that turns all that detail into a blur. And meanwhile, on Switch, it's even worse. There's seemingly no texture filtering applied at all on Switch, turning this texture ahead into this pixelated noise as we turn the corner. The upside for Switch is, texture filtering is at least engaged in Metal Gear Solid 3, even if it uses the same low quality anisotropic setting as Series X here. Overall, across both Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3, PS5 ends up with the best image quality. It's a big advantage, especially in the third game where the camera is fully controllable, making it easier to spot the better texture filtering. Also, and this is an aside, I did notice Series X has this odd lighting bug during MGS3's opening scene. It seems to be missing the sunlight, which I couldn't replicate on PS5 or Switch. The anti-aliasing and texture filtering points urgently need fixing on Series X, and especially on Switch in MGS2. More to the point, it's a bizarre situation on Series X, given the Master Collection produces an often worse image than what we already had in the Xbox 360 HD Collection, running in back compat. So here's that comparison, and please excuse the slight difference in gamma between the two. It turns out running 360 games on Series X triggers a slight boost in black levels, but the comparison stands. It shows how these two visual issues in the Master Collection are fixed instantly if you're a Series X user. Anti-aliasing quality, for example, is better in the older HD Collection, and we even have superior quality texture filtering in place thanks to Series X retroactively forcing a high setting for 360 games. Going back to this 2011 version, clears up the game's presentation right away, from the presentation of MGS2's oil rigs to the clarity of the wood bridge in MGS3. In terms of performance, there are a few other disappointments. On the plus side first, MGS2 and 3 at least run at 60 frames per second on PS5 and Series X without much issue. Admittedly, cutscenes are designed to run at a mix of 60, 30 and 15 FPS at points in MGS2, notably in this first encounter with Vamp. These drops appear to be hard-baked design choices that carry over from the PS2 days, and Hideo Kojima appeared to use frame caps for dramatic effect in character close-ups. It's a flourish that stays on modern consoles, but as far as the core gameplay goes, both games run at 60 frames per second. The situation on Nintendo Switch, though, is less encouraging. Whether played docked or as a portable, both MGS2 and 3 run with a 30 FPS cap. Obviously, that's a big setback next to the HD Collection, which runs at 60 FPS on older 360 and PS3 hardware. And even on PS2, the original version of MGS2 was built to run at 60 frames per second. Perhaps the most glaring part is that this 30 FPS cap on Switch has a kind of domino effect on the game's motion blur effect too. Notably, in MGS2's opening tanker section, it causes more notable banding behind camera movement, which now of course refreshes at half the rate it was intended. So in this early boss battle, for example, any first-person shooting turns the picture into this blurry mess. I'm glad to say the blur effect is at least disabled for the Raiden sections later on the oil rigs and Metal Gear Solid 3, so at least the issue goes away there. For Nintendo Switch and its Tegra X1 chipset, there's clearly a bottleneck to getting either game running at 60 FPS. And to pile on the misery, there are issues on top of that 30 FPS cap. First up, it's an unevenly frame-paced 30 FPS, with the frame time graph on the left side trilling between 16 and 50 milliseconds to create juddery movement. And then there's the drops below 30 FPS. Cutscenes in MGS2 again are the biggest culprit in my experience, but it may affect gameplay later. We're getting lurches into the low 20s in First Meeting Fortune, for example, and 18 FPS in long shots of the oil rig. So Switch just isn't coping here. Oddly enough though, there are flashes of 60 FPS gameplay in MGS2 as well on Switch, specifically for any interaction with doors or lockers. This appears to be tied to the game logic itself, and as soon as we reach for a locker handle, the frame rate on Switch immediately unlocks to 60 FPS and even stays there while we're inside the locker. All of which is to say, the optimization on Switch is in a bizarre state as it stands. The sub 30 FPS drops at 720p with zero anti-aliasing or texture filtering all show it needs a lot of work. And to be clear, the performance level while playing Switch as a portable isn't any better, with a similar low 20s reading during the same cutscenes. Most of these issues relate to MGS2 though, and the third game fixes a great many of these problems at least. Booting up the PC version of MGS2 and 3 in the Master Collection is perhaps the biggest shock of them all. After getting over the fact that this officially puts MGS3 on PC for the very first time, which is great, reality hits on booting the game. Again, we're looking at a fixed, native 720p rendering of both games, just like on console. There's no settings menu for either game on PC, there's no way to adjust anti-aliasing, the rendering resolution, aspect ratios, or even your preferred output resolution. You only get a choice between windowed and borderless full screen. And as is the trend, the MGS2 portion on PC also has the bigger visual issues. Much like on Nintendo Switch, the entire image runs at 720p with zero anti-aliasing whatsoever, creating a busy, noisy image. Thankfully, anti-aliasing is applied in MGS3 at least, but then again, both games use a very low quality pass of anisotropic filtering here. It's very similar in quality to Series X's implementation, and smudges all texture detail at an angle, and again, there's no in-game toggle to change it on PC. If there's one redeeming part to the PC release, it's that we have the flexibility to fix some of these problems ourselves. So to start with the easiest fix, the Nvidia and AMD control panels of course let us override the game's own texture filtering setting, bumping it to 16 times instead. Added to that, a modder named Serge Anor has devised a fix to force both MGS2 and 3 to run at a native 4K, or any resolution in fact. This involves a simple copy-paste of a couple of files to each game's directory, and then editing the .ini file from there lets you set any value right up to 3840 by 2160. In comparison with the game left at its default 720p speaks for itself. Running at 4K with 16 times anisotropic filtering completely fulfills the expectations I had of not just the PC release, but also PS5 and Series X. It's an absolute breath of fresh air seeing Metal Gear Solid 3's busy forest areas sharpen up with 9 times the pixel output. Sadly though, there is a catch. Tweaking the resolution like this causes the HUD overlay to break, alongside post-effects like blur. Still, the 4K mod proves a proper, official 4K option could, and perhaps should have been prioritized by Konami itself. And this is just scratching the surface on PC in terms of mods, with new efforts like upscale texture packs and more appearing by the day since its release.